Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation of the Kirk webinar series entitled Reaching Your Collaborators, Communicating for Connection and Education. My name is Eric Halverson. I'm the program coordinator for the College and University Recycling Coalition, and I'll be your moderator for today's program. For those of you not familiar with Kirk, the College and University Recycling Coalition is a member-based organization that works to grow collegiate recycling and waste reduction efforts by fostering technical information exchange and networking opportunities between the staff and student leaders implementing programs. Today's program is the third part of our 2020 webinar series, which is designed to highlight innovative campus programs and provide trends and perspectives on a broad range of operational and educational topics related to collegiate recycling and sustainable materials management. I want to thank our partner, AASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, for the logistical and promotional support of the webinar series. So before we begin, we have a few housekeeping notes to go over. If you have problems with your audio or video during the webinar, which has happened as the webinars have been increasingly popular during quarantine, you can reach a live technician by calling GoToWebinar's customer support line at 800-263-6317. Now, to avoid background noise, we've placed all but our panelists' lines on mute. We encourage you to submit questions at any time, however, by using the dashboard on the right side of your screen. Simply click the plus symbol where it says questions to type us a note, and we will read as many of these as possible out loud at the end of the presentations. However, copies of today's presentation slides will be available to download from our website, and a recording available to stream within the next day or so from the Kirk website, www.curc3r.org. If you have any questions and we don't get to them, our panelists today would be happy to answer any emails you send along to them, which we will also provide during the course of the program and then some follow-up information. For today's presentation, it's going to be about some topics like this. Trying to implement a campus-wide waste initiative with limited time, resources, and staff is a barrier that we've all faced. Due to the structure of many colleges and universities, creating effective waste and sustainability programs requires conversations with many different departments and plenty of outside-the-box thinking. How do we collaborate with different departments to implement zero waste programs? How can students and the greater campus community get engaged in sustainability? In this program, our presenters will share strategies for connecting to a general audience through communication campaigns and working directly with collaborators across campus departments. We'll start with a presentation from the team of Lisa Nicolaison of Princeton University, Pamela Gramlich of Colgate University, and Nathan Jandl of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And finally, we'll hear from Jen Maxwell, Sustainability Program Manager at Appalachian State University. Our first presentation is a very special one. This group met at the 2017 AASHE conference in San Antonio. Noticing a lack of communication sessions at AASHE and the need and interest in communications, they decided to put together a workshop for 2018 in Pittsburgh, and then joined forces again to host a workshop in Spokane in 2019. Lisa Nicolaison is the Engagement and Communications Coordinator at Princeton University's Office of Sustainability. Lisa oversees student and staff engagement programming and partners with other campus student sustainability groups and campus departments to integrate sustainability information and activities into the student and staff experience. Her role supports the development and implementation of a behavioral, science-driven communication strategy to promote sustainability at Princeton and beyond. Lisa develops, executes, and analyzes communications plans for the Office of Sustainability and implements and maintains the integrity of the office's visual identity. She serves as a creative strategist for the office, leveraging emerging trends, research, and techniques to connect to key audiences and stakeholders. Lisa received her Bachelor's of Arts from Elon University in psychology. She received her Master's in Business Administration with a focus on management from Rider University. Pamela Gramlich serves as the Assistant Director for Sustainability and Program Coordinator for Environmental Studies at Colgate University. In her role, she manages student programs, conducts the university's annual greenhouse gas inventory, and works closely with local municipalities to create community-based research opportunities for students and coordinate sustainability planning initiatives. She also oversees communications for the Office of Sustainability, is heavily involved with developing and facilitating campus employee engagement programs. Pamela received her Bachelor's of Arts in Advertising and Public Relations from Penn State University and her ISSP Sustainability Associate credential from the International Society of Sustainability Professionals. Nathan Jandl serves as Assistant Director for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Office of Sustainability. Nathan works closely with the office's co-directors to drive decision-making about strategy, vision, and budget, cultivate campus and community partnerships, and develop and execute new sustainability initiatives. Nathan also manages the office's communications efforts, assists with the student intern program, and is actively working with a group of colleagues to align sustainability efforts across the University of Wisconsin system schools. He received his Bachelor's of Arts in English from Middlebury College and his PhD in Literary Studies from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. So I'd like to welcome all of these panelists and to invite them to share this amazing presentation that I'm excited to hear. So take it away, y'all.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for having us. Thank you, Eric, CURC, thank you, AASHE. Thank you to my fellow presenters, Lisa and Pamela, longtime presenter buddies at this point. We just can't seem to not present about communication stuff together. And then also thank you, of course, Jennifer. And thank you all for being here. This presentation is actually sort of a different, moderate, what am I trying to say? Massaged version of a longer workshop that we did at AASHE. And we tried to kind of cut it down to size for this event. And what we hope to do is talk a little bit about just some terminology around creating communications campaigns for connection and education, as our title goes. And then we're going to give you a few different case studies from each of our universities to talk a little bit about how we approach the issue of dealing with recycling waste management via the lens of communications. So being the English guy that I am, one thing I tend to do is pick on language a little bit. And so I just wanted to step back for a second and talk about how we conceive of the difference between campaigns and strategies. Normally, this is an opportunity where I go to the whole audience and ask you to answer these questions. And so I'll just try to go through them quickly. But we often use these things, not exactly interchangeably, but they can slip in and out of conversation about a given initiative, if I'm going to bring in a third term here. So some questions to consider in approaching a communications plan, basically for a recycling initiative. And I'm realizing my terminology keeps growing on itself, and this is a very natural thing, is that there is a difference clearly between a campaign and a strategy. One does not necessarily require the other, though we find that an overarching strategy for, let's say, Office of Sustainability's communication efforts helps to drive how the campaigns are rolled out. But campaigns don't always have to fall within a single strategy. In fact, that can be restrictive if they do. You may have different strategies for different audiences, for example, or there may be a priority or initiative that's coming down from campus leadership, and that may require its own version of a strategy, its own sub-campaigns. So it's worth kind of thinking about those things and not assuming that they just automatically blend in with each other. For the sake of this webinar, as you can see in our little equation, we're talking more about campaigns than we're talking about strategy. And we're saying a campaign is basically the audience that you're trying to speak to, which could be many different audiences in one, or could be a single audience like undergraduate students, plus the topic or project or the event that you're trying to do communications about, and then the platforms on which you're doing those communications. Next slide. And to get a little bit deeper into those terms, when we think of audience, we're not just talking about categories of people, we're also talking about the qualities of people. And that may include things like their behaviors, people who do certain things, or the social norm, sort of the social understanding that's created in a different context and how that may impact how people act. Cultural and institutional contexts, expectations on people, and so on. The topic, of course, is the idea or the event, but it's also the more abstract qualities when we think about a topic. We're also thinking about things like learning and engagement and investment and so on. And then the platforms is the where and the what of your campaign. So that might be social media and it might be an Instagram post, but it's also how you're doing that post and in what manner. What sort of tone are you taking? How are you fitting into other conversations or hashtags or jargon? You can go to the next one. So driving all of our campaigns, and we're going to move into the case studies in a second. We think we kind of talked about this, and this is part of our initial presentation that we gave at AASHE. We wanted to offer some key questions that we think are really important for approaching communications campaign, and this certainly applies to waste recycling, compost efforts, but it applies to a lot of things. So this is broadly applicable. So when we're designing a campaign, we think about things like who the audience is and who the stakeholders are. Those are often the same, but not always the same, or they're not, all audience is not necessarily all stakeholders. Question 2 is, what are you trying to communicate? The topic, but also what you're hoping to people to gain from that topic. What is the behavior or attitude you're looking to change? The intended outcome of your communications is then what's sort of the deliverable in a sense? What are people doing because you've communicated to them? What are the platforms and mediums, and not just what, but why? We often default to saying we're just going to do a blast across all communications platforms, and that can be fine, and it depends on the campaign, but sometimes that detracts from the efficacy. And then finally, how will you recognize success? And there's aspects to analytics there's engagement, and there's outcomes, which we'll all get to in our case studies. So with that, I think, unless Lisa and Pamela, I missed anything, I'll turn it over to, I think, Lisa to start us off.
Thanks, Nathan. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to take you through a little journey into our campaign that we just started this semester called Waste Wednesdays. So this actually started in mid-February with an Instagram story that I decided would be really helpful for both our office and just sort of supporting our initiatives campus-wide to reduce the amount of contamination in our recycling stream, to just do like this really fun quiz just one day. I literally just kind of threw it together. It wasn't anything super planned on my part. And I've seen some of these on Instagram. Instagram has a lot of great features, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So essentially, I threw this up on an Instagram story where it lived for 24 hours. We had an incentive so that the first person who followed us that got closest to 100 or 100 would win one of our reusable utensil kits, which are a really hot commodity on campus. So we did 10 stories, and you can see one here featured. We did things that were, I'd say, most confusing to students. and pizza boxes, coffee cups, things like batteries, things that have special recycling. So we did 10 of those with either option of doing recycle, landfill, or other. And the participation was amazing. A lot of students, also staff, departments shared this, engaged in this. We had over 200 accounts, which is very good for us, participate, and then throughout. So it was 10 stories, like I said, and at the end, we said, come back tomorrow and we'll explain the answers. And so this was sort of key for me, because versus, just sort of filling this out like, oh, okay, that's landfill. The next day, I sort of delved into the why. So why aren't these recyclable? What is actually a better option, perhaps a donation or reuse, or clothing, or textbooks? Kind of taking, as Nathan said, a humorous tone to this. Instagram and our social media generally tends to be a little lighter. So obviously this is very educational. There's a lot of information here, but I tried to make it somewhat entertaining, and so people would pay attention to it. And I was excited to see, again, just 24 hours later, a repeat of, you could see the accounts engaging with viewing the stories. We received a lot of messages of people asking additional questions. We followed this up with sort of additional questions as well. So I had immediate takeaways from this. This was just 24 hours of trying to educate students on campus. I learned which items were really confusing, because you could see the results right away. To see what people thought was recyclable and what we needed to improve our education around those items. The need to explain the why and how to do that. And so even though I approached each answer with very detailed information, I realized I need to explain even more when we do either in person or other educational efforts on campus. We need to be doing a better job promoting our collections for special items on campus, which a lot of the answers indicated people didn't know about. And we need to promote reusables, as the #1 answer, because almost all the items are disappointing to people that they can't recycle them. So we did a follow-up. A staff member actually won, and we posted this. And the value in an Instagram story is that you can keep it as a highlight, so that even though it's 24 hours, anyone can go back and look at this. So this was another great way. So sort of like 3 days of sort of continuing to encourage engagement in this. And so I even followed it up with a question, should we continue to do this? And got over 40 responses positive. So I worked with my students. I have social media student employees, and we decided to make this a weekly campaign on our Instagram channel called Waste Wednesday, primarily focused to the students on campus, but also the campus community. This is really a campus-wide effort to reduce our contamination. And we thought about waste in a lot of different ways, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but obviously our focus here was what is recyclable, and then just expanding that into other waste education, and trying to improve recycling on our campus and reduce contamination was the behavior what we were trying to change. And also just to get people to think about these things versus just like, oh, that's landfill, oh, that's recycling. Think about why is that the case? And then having students come back from this with different concepts of waste. And so, as I said, this is all through Instagram stories. Instagram stories have a lot of great features. This is very easy for anyone on this call to implement. I'd be happy to talk to anyone if they ever have questions about how to do this. And then success. So initially from Instagram, we can look at our analytics. We can also take a look at contamination rates, which we work closely with our building services recycling manager to see what items are most frequently contaminating our bags, both from our hauler and just on campus, sort of visual. And then engagement in programming. So students who are really engaged on our social media, we end up hearing in conversation about this in particular. I heard a lot of talk about this recycling quiz. It came up often throughout February, which was really fun, both from students and staff. And then just having them see that this is sort of an interesting topic that they want to get engaged in other programming that we do. So as I mentioned, we kind of took Waste Wednesday and expanded this concept of what waste is. So we, when we launched, we focused on essentially 3 topics for each week. The local, so thinking about Princeton specific, the regional, thinking about New Jersey or the Northeast, and then global. So I just have an example here of one of our first stories that we did. And you can see we used pretty much all of the interactive features that Instagram has to offer. So you can do quizzes, polls, the slider feature, which a lot of people love to add because it's just a fun thing to slide on an Instagram story. You can actually use that as an answer for a quiz. And then questions, of course, so people can ask more questions and have more engagement. So this was just an example of a Princeton focused question that we did, and then the New Jersey focus. And for Waste Wednesday, because it was a weekly campaign, we didn't do a 24-hour next sort of stay tuned for the answer. We did it immediately following, which is something I'm thinking about, whether the 24 hours was the way to go or whether we should sort of go back to that. So this is still sort of a work in progress. This is a very new program campaign for us. So we expanded again on this waste theme. So we thought about laundry, which is another area that we're really trying to educate our students around. We thought about waste in terms of water waste and energy waste, and we kind of made it fun for students and brought it to a different topic, so it's not always about recycling. So we had some questions here about how much water is wasted when you wash your clothes on the heavy setting, and then we had this tied into another program that we were doing. So we were always looking to see how we can tie in things like this, like weekly programming on our social media accounts, into other campaigns, outside of social media that we're trying to promote on campus. So in this case, we were trying to promote drying racks to students and potentially giving them away. And so we were trying to tie that to this as well. And then just recently, we tied in our Waste Wednesday with the National Composting Awareness Week. And so we did it all about composting, and we talked a lot about New Jersey's bill for the local, and then we talked about global issues around composting. So these are just a few examples, and all of these are on our story highlights. Of you can check those out on our account. And these are just some future plans for this program. As I mentioned, it's really new, and we actually took a step back from it during COVID-19 just because we were trying to refocus our efforts and think about what recycling and waste means during this time. But we have a lot of plans for the future. This is a program that I'd like to continue on our social media. I highly encourage sort of this weekly approach, or sort of a planned approach to your social media, so that your followers know to expect these different types of campaigns. So we've been thinking again about reusables, hard to recycle items, tying them into event-specific things happening on campus, like move-outs, tying it into education around our on-campus composter, and then doing a lot of partnerships. So you can do a lot of tagging on Instagram, which is great. We did that in the quiz, but promoting this with our partners, so like the Student Coffee Club, maybe we could do a quiz with them where we're talking about coffee cups and how you should bring your own cup and they'll give a discount versus the fact that they're not recyclable. Pairing it with more giveaways, because students love giveaways, but that's giveaways that are thoughtful and not just sort of wasteful items. And then thinking about Waste Wednesday beyond Instagram, because this is a social platform, but there's a lot to be said for bringing it sort of to the in-person experience. So thinking about ways to bring it to events or other things that we might do in the future. So with that, I'll go back to Nathan.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. A little hard to find on this GoToMeeting thing. So hello again. I am going to be talking about a project that we call Recycle Right. We did put the hashtag in front of it, but I won't say that whole phrase the whole time. And let me just quickly start a timer for myself here. So what I'm going to be doing in this little case study presentation is also compressing another presentation I did at AASHE with some of my colleagues, who included Ali Berg, who is a project assistant for us at the Office of Sustainability and formerly an intern, and Hannah Kaysen is a current intern. She was not part of the presentation, but she contributed. Professor Brett Shaw, who's the Department of Life Sciences Communication faculty member, and the two other partners working on this were Carrie Cruz, the Director of College Library at UW-Madison, and Brooke Weiland, who is a graduate student and now a professional designer. So you can go to the next slide, please. So what's interesting about Recycle Right is that this was an example of kind of a cross-campus communication project, which was integrated into curriculum in a sense. So Brett Shaw teaches a life sciences communication senior capstone class called LSC 515, and he basically worked with us at the Office of Sustainability to identify an issue that his class could work on. And this class basically has a number of objectives that you can see here. I won't read them all out, but basically they're learning about social marketing, doing research, creative thinking, and so on. And they're trying to, by the end of the class, have worked through a real world problem on campus, create a campaign to help address that problem, and then they present them to the clients and project partners who were us, and in this case, College Library. And one of Professor Shah's priorities is that the class, or rather the presentations from the class, which the clients picked a winner from, that those would actually be implemented on campus in some capacity, that they didn't end in May when the class ended. You can go to the next one. So the place we picked to work on, or that we suggested that Brett's class work on, was a building called College Library. It's kind of the right side of this picture. The left side is something called Helen C. White, which is where I spent a long period of time in many dark rooms when I was getting my PhD, because that's the English building. College Library is an interesting building on campus because it is the busiest library on campus. It's also where they allow food and drink. It's mainly an undergraduate library. You can even get food delivered. There's a small cafe. It's open 24 hours. And there are custodial challenges because the custodial schedule is such that they do not pick up over the weekends. And so there's usually a huge overflow on Monday. And this has to do with the ability to hire custodians and so on. And so they had a lot of issues with overflowing trash cans, things not going where they were supposed to. And lastly, I would say, important note, is that while the city of Madison is a single stream recycling location, the university is multiple streams because we're able to sell some of those things on the secondary market and get a little bit of money back. Go to the next one. So the students took on this problem of overflowing recycling bins and people not putting things in the right place, and found a few things. And they did both qualitative interviews and also some quantitative work too. Actually, we helped on the quantitative side. So they did observations and in-depth interviews with patrons, and they found basically that students were often distracted, which is very understandable. A lot of people studying and cramming in College Library. They supported recycling, but they didn't necessarily know where things were supposed to go. And there was going to be some more that came out of their research as well. You can go to the next one. They also did a survey, which was done via iPads, and there was a free beverage coupon, I think, at the cafe there for people who did the survey. And what they found in the survey is that people tend to think that others care about recycling less than they do. So everyone makes less of an effort to do the right thing. So the social norms are not good, basically. The mutual expectations about what others are doing, in other words, are not as good as what you think you're doing in this case. Okay, next slide. So those of us who were working with Brett's class, or who were the clients of Brett's class, showed up on their last day, and each of the students gave presentations. And the winning campaign was something called Recycle Right. We just thought we liked the logo, we liked the way that they were thinking about the problem. And so we basically took the best ideas from them and then also from a few of the others and turned it into a communications campaign, basically. All right, next slide. Trying to be aware of my time. I also want to have a quick shout out here to Brooke, who is our wonderful designer. She's a fantastic science, marketing, and design person. You can see this is one of her gorgeous prints, and you can check out her website if you're interested more in her work. But she was wonderful to work with on this and very patient. Next slide. Okay, so for our key questions, pretty simple. Who is our audience? Students and library patrons, mostly students. What are we trying to communicate? That we want them to recycle intentionally. My English brain doesn't like recycle right. I always want to say, recycle properly or something. The behavior attitude is we basically are trying to cut down on wish cycling or aspirational recycling, where people are saying, it's plastic, it should probably go in plastic, which is a big problem. And we were, everybody on this call probably understands the global issues with contaminated recycling streams, and we're certainly seeing that in Madison. Those negative social norms are also a big issue. We wanted to bring about education and engagement with our initiative. The platforms we used, we'll see a little bit more later. You can read them there. And our success was going to be measured by the reduced contamination of waste streams, in addition to just general better behavior. Next slide. So I'm keeping an eye on my time here, so I'm gonna kind of keep moving pretty quickly here. College Library is kind of interesting on the inside of the building, and what I would say is with any of these campaigns, the site-specific context matters. And so we had certain kinds of bins that we had to work with. We didn't have a lot of walls behind them to put prints on or posters on, and so we spent a lot of time in the space trying to figure out how do you put a better sign, where does the sign go, and what does it need to look like. Next slide. So our final design was something like this, and I say final with an asterisk, and you can see my little quip at the lower right there. It's never final. We were constantly updating it, in part because the rules for our multi-stream recycling have constantly changed. So now, for example, we can compost paper cups, so that's exciting, but that means we have to change our signage. You can see what we basically tried to do was use photos so that it was very clear what objects we were talking about, add text there for clarification if necessary and for accessibility, and then really focus on the idea of what not to put in. So recycle right indicates don't just recycle, but sort of recycle properly. And so we went with a big red stop sign, what we don't want in there. And we were also, of course, focusing on some sense of aesthetic appeal and coherence. Next slide. We also supported what we were doing with additional prompts and education. So just checking my time. So we had campaign education via posters. We had table tents on a lot of tables around College Library, which identified problem items like coffee cups and like told people how to pull them apart or told them not to try to recycle a straw or utensils, that kind of thing. So we're trying to really get at the behaviors that we had identified as being particularly problematic. And then we gave some information about the project itself, so people had the meta understanding. Next slide. At the same time, we rolled out a communications campaign, part of what this is all about. And so we worked with College Library and we shared with our communicators listserv that we were doing this. And so Brooke helped us create images that we could use this was on Twitter, but we had Facebook and Instagram posts. There was an interview on the student radio with those of us working on the project, and then we did a newsletter rollout as well. Next slide. In the meantime, we also realized we needed to have some quantitative backup for whatever was happening. So our wonderful interns did trash audits both before and after we actually implemented the campaign. And by implemented, I mean stick the new signs in there and roll things out on social media. So we had the very helpful custodial crew at College Library separate out the trash and recycling bags for us from a particular day. Our team came in, separated and weighed everything and measured contamination. And that was again by about a month and then about 5 months or so after the campaign. Next slide. I know I'm over my 7 minutes. I'm going to keep moving quickly. So our results were actually quite good. We had a 50% weight reduction in recycling contamination over several months. Doesn't look like much, but that's still a pretty good change. One thing to note is that contaminants that we found are often lightweight items. And so even though it's, it doesn't quite reflect the volume of things that we reduce that were contaminating the trash or contaminating the recycling. So we were happy with this result. Next. And then, so some of our takeaways were that social marketing techniques and user-centered design are effective. We think this was essentially an effective campaign, even if it wasn't perfect. We really relied on student knowledge to help drive what we were doing and to help us engage people better. Relationships are key. We were really grateful to have great relationships with Carrie at College Library, with Brooke, with Brett, and so on. And we think it's really important to pilot test materials before you launch things, including things like, what kind of adhesive do you use on the back of your signs? Because I can tell you they're all peeling off right now. And I can talk more about our next steps later if there's time, but suffice it to say, we're trying to roll out a recycle right to some other buildings on campus. All right, thank you.
Okay, so I hope everybody can hear me all right. Pamela Gramlich with Colgate University, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a campaign that we call Cups or Trash that came out of, Lisa, you can go to the next slide, something that I call the Cup Catastrophe of 2019. So what happened in the spring of 2019 is Madison County, it's the county that Colgate University is in, it's who we recycle through. They changed essentially all of their recycling guidelines because of obviously things that were happening nationally with recycling at the time. So before these changes, we were accepting all plastics 1 through 7. Everything was very inclusive. You could put almost anything in the recycling that you could imagine. And then after, and Lisa, you can go to the next slide, it turns into something a bit more confusing. And if you just click through these next few slides, Lisa, people are asking questions like, what do you mean by a neck, right? So we can, people don't really know what it means to have, to be able to recycle plastic bottles and jugs and things with necks. What about things with the triangle still? And then under here, it says, you know, all other plastics, but and cups is listed there, but the question of what about paper cups, right? So there's a lot that's left out, and people have to do a lot of digging in this search tool to be able to actually learn what can and cannot be recycled anymore. And so next slide, Lisa. So kind of what it came out to be is that these big changes plus vague guidelines equaled a ton of contamination. And if you go to the next slide, there's just cups everywhere in here, and so much more contamination. This is a recycling bin, right? And you wouldn't be able to tell by what you're looking at right now. It just looks like garbage. So a big yikes, we needed to do something about that for sure. And rather than trying to do a big campaign that tackled every single part of the new recycling guidelines, we focused on one thing that was a big issue that was coming up time and time and time again, and that was cups. So if you go to the next slide, Lisa, I'll lay out my my little questions. So our primary audience was students. We obviously wanted to educate the whole entire campus, but because the biggest cup culprits on campus are usually the students, because this is a residential campus, we decided to focus primarily on them. We used other strategies to try to engage employees a bit more, but I won't talk about that today. Stakeholders were campus and county stakeholders, including custodians. We're really just trying to communicate that contaminating recycling is not great, and cups are no longer recyclable. So all of the messages here, put the cups in the trash, reduce recycling contamination. We decided to use kind of a hybrid model of trying to do peer-to-peer work and community-based social marketing. And word of mouth techniques. And then in addition to that, social media, signage, and stickers, almost. We didn't quite get there. And then we decided to recognize success through a survey. We don't do the best job at keeping track of our recycling rates on campus. There's always a lot of turnover in buildings and grounds. So whenever we feel like we're almost there, something happens. So we figured a survey might be the best way for us to practically, you know, get some good results and measure our success. Next slide. So like I mentioned before, we use peer-to-peer. So at the start of the academic year, in August, September, when all of the orientation leaders and outdoor education, wilderness adventure leaders and pre-orientation folks and RAs, whenever they were going through their orientations, I would go to their trainings and I would tell them that cups are trash and here's why. And I wanted them really to take home that one message. If they took away nothing else from the entire presentation, it's that cups are not recyclable in Madison County. Here are the reasons why. And kind of like what Lisa mentioned, we thought it was really important to explain why, because that can start conversations. And also, why would the Office of Sustainability be telling us to throw things in the trash? Don't they want us to recycle? Why is our messaging trash? And so we wanted to really make sure that we could communicate to folks, you know, this is why cups are trash. This is why contamination is bad. And sometimes it's better to throw things in the trash than it is to go ahead and try to wish cycle them. So it was a lot of trainings. I made sure to, you know, really hone in on that point. Also told all of my interns, our student volunteers, and then use different media strategies. So if you go to the next slide, here's just a quick example of an Instagram story that we did. So this was the very beginning of the campaign, and people already knew that cups were trash, right? This was very, very early on. So the word of mouth actually did a lot. Getting those key student leaders to be able to share our message was so incredibly important. And then we kind of knew we were making it, Lisa, if you want to go to the next slide. When we did not post this on Colgate's Barstool account, I'm sure most of your universities also have Barstool accounts. If you go to the next slide, Lisa, I'll highlight a couple of things. But they posted on the Colgate Barstool account in September, you know, cans are recyclable, but cups are trash. PSA, sus is a must. So sus is a must is our office hashtag. So it was really, it meant a lot to me to kind of see this, because it meant that it was becoming a little bit more mainstream. And even though it's a little weird to have our messaging on a Barstool account, it definitely was indicative that what we were doing was actually catching on, getting some attention. So this was still pretty early in the semester. And then throughout the rest of the year, we continued to kind of shift the focus away from peer-to-peer. Obviously, we were hoping that people were still engaging their peers and starting these conversations. But Lisa, if you want to go to the next slide. We also focused on some signage that we would post around campus. The interns made some memes that were kind of fun. So I like this one with Pam from the office there. Corporate needs you to find the difference between the picture, between this picture and this picture. And then Pam says they're the same picture. So cups also being the same as trash. So they made a few things like that that they would share around, and that kind of caught on. And then if you go to the next slide, one of our amazing campus partners, Catrielle Pritz, really the true MVP of everything. She also has a website that you can check out if you want. She's a designer in our communications office, but she also works to just create these amazing toolkits for people. So through my conversations with her and also our Madison County recycling coordinator, we started a Cups or Trash campaign, and we made sure to include the Ask Me Why part, right? So the idea is that we give people a sticker, or these are social media posts that they can share, and it has, you know, with the post, you would put a little caption explaining why cups are trash, or if it's a sticker, which we hopefully will still eventually make, you know, you have a little bit more information about why cups are trash in Madison County. So she made these amazing images for us that we shared on social media. We were going to turn them into stickers, but you know, 2020 brought on some weird things. So let's go to the next slide. So we did a survey, and it's not a perfect survey. We tried to name it something other than a recycling survey. It's consumption and disposal habits survey is what we called it. And the sample size was about 9% of students, definitely probably some bias in there, but the big takeaway is that around 75% of respondents knew that cups were not recyclable in Madison County. So from going to a place where it was a complete disaster, we don't have the stats from before that, but it was a complete change. So how would anybody know, right? So assuming that maybe we started at 10% and then going up to 75% was great. Our goal was 80%, but we fell a little short, but so did 2020. So that is my presentation. I wanted to kind of speed that along, but thank you all. And I guess we'll kind of just kick it over.
Thank you so much for all that wonderful information, a lot to take in. Some great questions here about graphics and signage and a bunch of other great ideas. But so I encourage those people, as we're running short a little bit on time, to please write down these emails from whoever it was that you were interested in hearing the most from, and they'd be happy to get back to you. And they're very friendly, I promise. So we will move on here to our next presenter, which is Jennifer Maxwell from Appalachian State University. Jen Maxwell has been with Appalachian State University since 2006, and she leads many of the campus sustainability programs, including zero waste, student outreach and engagement, green certifications and events, the Food Pantry Free Store, and the Sustainable Film Series. She's a founding member of the Appalachian State University Sustainability Council and the Living Green Residential Learning Community. And in addition, Jen also serves as the vice chair for the College and University Recycling Coalition here with us. So welcome, Jen. She studied and received her Bachelor's of Science in Appropriate Technology in 2001 and a Master's in Higher Education University Leadership in 2017, both from Appalachian State. So I'd like to welcome Jen.
You hear me now?
Yep, hearing you great,
Okay.
Jen.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction and for everyone allowing me the opportunity to share. And for my fellow presenters for a fantastic presentation, some really great information you all shared. So I really appreciate that. I'm gonna take a little bit different approach around collaboration. And just a little bit really quickly about App State. I won't spend too much time here, but we are a public institution in the mountains of North Carolina, so a very rural campus with a little over 19,000 students, a very long history of sustainability and dedication to sustainability. And so I'll keep moving just because we don't have too much time. So I want to talk just a little bit about kind of the benefit of collaboration on campus. One of the things that I was thinking about in developing this presentation was that most of our work, all of our work really in our office is around relationship development and collaboration. And so we are always supporting other areas. And so I've listed some here, you know, and the list kind of goes on, but all of our work is about creating these dynamic working relationships and supporting others, because it takes all these different departments coming together for campus sustainability to advance. Whoops. So why is it important? You know, it's a real opportunity for education for us. So we're all lifelong learners and we're in the business of education here in higher ed. And so any opportunity for us to collaborate with others gives us a chance to kind of teach and really bring people into the fold about sustainability and what it means and really meet them where they are. So it's really important to us here to ask that question, find out people's interest, and then really connect to them around sustainability in that way. With collaboration, everyone's needs are considered. So, you know, while our biggest sense of urgency in our office is sustainability, others have other things that they're thinking about. And so coming together to the table, everyone has a chance to share what their needs are and have the opportunity to really be considered and in the process of a plan. Voices are heard and buy-in is created, and so I'll talk about that a little bit later, but when we've done a lot of work around zero waste on our campus, we've made sure to include many people at the table so that we know that we could get that buy-in. So we did some transitioning of our recycling to our housekeeping staff a number of years ago, and so we made sure that we had a lot of them on a committee to ensure that their voice was heard as well. I mean, it creates a better understanding and mutual respect. So you, like I said, you're developing these key relationships and you're developing relationships for the future. So I'm going to focus just a little bit on our a leadership team that we have here. So a little bit of background information. I've been here for quite a while, and so we had a waste reduction and recycling office before our sustainability office was created. Like many universities have sort of this waste reduction and recycling work in facilities, and then over the years, some of them have transitioned into sustainability and some have created a separate sustainability office. So I came back to App State after going to school here and managed waste reduction and recycling, and then our office was created and my role transitioned. So with that transition was quite a bit of transition. For our recycling kind of moved to housekeeping, our compost efforts moved away from a specific waste reduction and recycling office to our landscaping team. So we had quite a bit of growing pains when that happened, and my role shifted to a little bit more holistic approach to directing zero waste, and at the same time, trying to work and collaborate with facilities still. And then in addition, all of the operational stuff stayed with facilities, but all of the education and outreach piece of it came with me to the sustainability office. So it took us a little while to get through those growing pains. And in that time, we tried to figure out the best way for us to continue to collaborate with facilities. And so we developed a zero waste leadership team. Now we're to the point where we're meeting every 2 weeks. And it's mainly the Office of Sustainability and Facilities, but we do bring in others as needed. So if it's a project that's specific to campus dining, say we're working on expanding composting, we'll bring in someone from campus dining. You'll see a list here. I'm not going to go through everyone, but housing, athletics, university recreation, all of these have a role to play within zero waste on campus. So we bring them in at times, and then we are really trying to think about now one of our goals is to bring everybody together probably quarterly. I think it'll be really good so that we're all in the same room. We've had a lot of transition with who's collecting our recycling on campus. We've gone to a contract with Republic Services, and so we think a quarterly meeting to bring everybody to the table, in addition to keeping these meetings going every couple weeks. But and I just wanted to mention that the area of focus for this leadership team is downstream strategies, and so anything from program development to education campaigns to collections and equipment, we're all kind of vetting those decisions through this group. So it gives us a real opportunity to all be at the table and make these decisions for the university. So other important collaborations I just want to mention, and Kirk is one of them here, and so, but I think it's important for us to, as sustainability professionals, to always be thinking about collaborations across our region or across other campuses, and even across the nation. And so, so the UNC system here, so we're part of a 17-school UNC system. We have a zero waste working group. We host an energy summit here on campus, and so we have a working group for zero waste underneath that umbrella. And you can see here we're charged with elevating the importance of sustainable purchasing decisions and waste reduction efforts. So upstream, the upstream aspect of zero waste, which is sustainable purchasing and kind of sourcing, and then all the way to the downstream where we're looking at recycling and composting efforts. But it gives us an opportunity to collaborate system-wide on some goals. We can create mutual system-wide goals if that's possible. Also sharing ideas and networking and learning from others, which is exactly what you're doing here today. We also have a regional group with North and South Carolina, and then Kirk, like I mentioned. And so some of the benefits of that is just really the opportunity to come together and hear from others, what they're doing, what's going on. Sharing challenges and barriers is probably the most important thing. I really learned a lot today from the presentation, we have had, we've developed a campaign around signage and stuff like that too. And so a lot of the same challenges I heard and a lot of the really beneficial things too that y'all shared, the peer-to-peer and the importance especially of students teaching students, because they don't want to hear from, especially me being a 40-something, I'm not in tune with the best way to educate, our students. And so that peer-to-peer is really important. So sharing those ideas and hearing from others so that we're not reinventing the wheel is really important. So thinking about, again, other collaborations that you can be a part of beyond campus collaboration is beneficial for you and your work. I'm going to stop there. Sorry, I rambled through that real quick, but I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. And so here you'll see my contact information, and I'll turn it back over to Eric.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yes, thank you so much. We have, I think maybe we could take a couple questions, but I would also suggest reaching out individually from the people you've heard today, and we'll be able to they'll be able to answer those questions in better time, I think. So one of the ones that did come up that I think people might be able to give a shot at is distracted students. That's a big problem, and especially those might not be looking for the signage. Is it better to dive into the why on the signs, or just keep it simple with some graphics and some little text? So if somebody wants to take a shot at that, they can feel free to.
Okay, I'll bite. I think we went with minimal text, but still a lot of clarity where possible. So the text is supportive, but I think that's why we went with, on the signage for the Recycle Right campaign, we went with photos of the images. Doesn't mean we had to take the photos, but you can find free photo images online. Because our perception is people are approaching the bins and ready to just drop something and walk. They don't want to spend a lot of time sitting there and reading through directions. But you can have, that's where the supporting materials can be helpful. For example, the table tents and the posters for people who are more interested in really understanding that, and the other kinds of communications materials where you can help reinforce messaging.
And this kind of has to do, this next question kind of has to do with both presentations. The collaboration that happened with Recycle Right, that was also a collaboration with an academic, like, you know, the school part of the school. So how did that connection come to be? And did the professor reach out first, or how was there a previous relationship there with your sustainability office?
In that case, Professor Brett Shaw had a relationship with the sustainability office before I joined, which was in 2017. And so he had helped, because of his expertise in community-based social marketing and the kind of work that he did, he had helped us do a couple of projects before this one, but we had sort of settled in this yearly process with him of doing something with his life sciences communication capstone class. And we're doing another one on energy use in the dorms starting this summer. Well, we're trying to, because no one's in the dorms, or a few people are in the dorms, but the idea is there.
Thank you. And then finally, probably the last question we'll take today, with the constantly changing standards for different waste stream acceptances and things like that, how do you stay on your toes about that and make sure that your audience stays on their toes about that as well?
I can tackle that. So I think one thing I neglected to mention was the reason I launched this sort of initial recycling quiz and then really honed in on Waste Wednesdays, because internally we're working through a lot of changes of signage, bins, things that are just, like you said, constantly changing, happening. And so we really focused on our social media to get that information out to students sort of as updated as we can. And I think that's something going forward that I think learning from my co-presenters, just sort of focusing, honing in on specific items can be really helpful, especially if it's such a change. Like cups was definitely a big one for our campus, yogurt cups, yogurt and cup containers of cups, things like that. So I think just trying to find the best ways to reach students so you're not changing hopefully your signs and bins as much as every week, but it's a challenge for sure.
Thank you. Okay, that'll be the last question we'll take here. Once again, please reach out to our presenters. They're very resourceful and we appreciate them sharing their knowledge with us during this time. So we'll make a few announcements and then, apologies, one moment. Make a few announcements and then we'll let you all go on your way. If you enjoyed this content, our next Kirk webinar is Managing Surplus Property for Zero Waste. That'll be August 20th. So anything, all the surplus property that goes around your campus and things getting tossed out at the end of the year, how do you handle that? And the presenters are already coming into shape and form for that. And of course, if you want to visit any of our previous webinar recordings, go to our website there at the top of the screen, and you'll be able to access a whole archive over a decade of webinars just like this one with helpful information. You just have to become a member on our website, which is free. It takes less than 5 minutes. In the fall, in October, Kirk was hoping to host a workshop on composting and food waste reduction at AASHE's conference. Unfortunately, there won't be an option for an in-person gathering, so we'll be working on a sort of extended webinar for that kind of period, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And then finally, one of our partner organizations, the Northeast Recycling Council, will be hosting a webinar on July 21st, 2020, State Actions to Address Recycling Changes.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Following this webinar, you should receive a prompt to complete a quick survey. We encourage you to take a minute to give us feedback on today's program. And again, we want to thank AASHE for their support of our 2020 webinar series. And one last time, thank you, Lisa, Pamela, Nathan, and Jen for all your presentations today. We enjoyed having you on so much.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks again. Thanks for those who tuned in.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
There will be a recording of this program up on our website, www.curc3r.org, in the next day or so. So thank you all and have a good afternoon.